Hi guys, welcome back to the Soul Food Podcast, a safe space where we talk about God, theology, the Bible, and the Christian life in general. I'm your host, Noma. Last time, I spoke on the need for preparation to meet Jesus Christ at his second coming, using the parable of the 10 virgins written in Matthew chapter 25 from verse 1 to 13. In today's episode, I will be continuing with that theme of preparation. The key question I'll be answering is, how do we prepare and stay ready to meet Jesus? What does that look like in practical terms? In short, this looks like using your time, resources, platforms, skills, knowledge, experiences, energy, etc. to glorify God in every way He has called you to. For instance, if He's called you to start a business, do it. If He's called you to write books, do it. If He's called you to work a 9 to 5 in a particular sector, do it. Or if He's called you to study a certain course, do it. I already covered the parable of the 10 virgins, so in this episode, let's turn our focus to the other two parables that Jesus told in the same context, which are the parable of the faithful, sensible servant from Matthew 24 from verse 45 to 51, and the parable of the 3 servants or the talents, and that's written in Matthew chapter 25 from verse 14 to 30. Matthew 24 from verse 45 to 51 says, "A faithful, sensible servant is one to whom the master can give the responsibility of managing his other household servants and feeding them. If the master returns and finds that the servant has done a good job, there will be a reward. I tell you the truth, the master will put that servant in charge of all he owns. But what if the servant is evil and thinks, 'My master won't be back for a while,' and he begins beating the other servants, partying and getting drunk? The master will return unannounced and unexpected, and he will cut the servant to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Similar to the parable of the 10 virgins, this parable of this faithful, sensible servant has the same overarching theme of the unexpected return of the master, who in this case is Jesus Christ. And his servants symbolize those of us that belong to him, staying ready and being prepared for his return. What sets the faithful, sensible servant apart from the evil servant? The faithful, sensible servant, in spite of the date or time of the master's return, was a good steward over the responsibility that the master entrusted in his care. Whereas the evil servant, who assumed that the master's return would be delayed, mistreated those he was responsible for and partied away his time. Consequently, when the master returned unannounced, he gave the faithful, sensible servant a reward, but punished the evil servant. If we rightly apply this same interpretation to the parable of the 3 servants, we get the same lesson, that good stewardship over the responsibilities that Christ has entrusted us with is the key to preparation for his second coming. Let's read that in Matthew 25 from verse 14 to 30, which says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground, and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, "Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more." The master was full of praise. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more." The master said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back." But the master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it." Then he ordered, "Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So again, here we see the 3 servants, which represent all those that belong to Christ, whom have all been entrusted with different levels of responsibilities in accordance to their abilities in the form of bags of silver. One was given 5 bags, the second 2 bags, and the third was given 1 bag of silver. 2 out of 3 invested the amount they were given, and it accrued interest, whereas the third one hid the money in the ground. Upon their master's return, the 2 that invested their bags of silver presented them and the interest to him. He was pleased with them, commended them, gave them more responsibilities because of their faithfulness, and they went to celebrate. However, when the one that hid the bag of silver in the ground came forward and told on himself, the master rebuked him harshly, ordered for the bag to be taken away from him and given to one of the faithful servants, then for him to be thrown into outer darkness as punishment. Saints, while we are waiting on the once-in-a-lifetime global event known as the return of Jesus Christ, we are commanded and expected to be preparing in the interim. There is wisdom, discernment, and prudence in being a prepper, because preparation puts you in a place of readiness. That way you are not caught off guard. Also, preparation is the antidote to panic. If you are ready and stay ready, you have no cause to be caught off guard. You have no cause to be afraid of what's coming or panic when it gets here. Speaking of wisdom and prudence in preparation, let's look at a biblical example that demonstrated both. It's going to be a long read, so bear with me. I'm going to read the story of Noah from Genesis chapter 5 verse 32 to Genesis chapter 8 from verse 1 to 18. So Genesis chapter 5 verse 32 says, "After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth." Genesis chapter 6 from verse 1 to 22 says, "Then The people began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth, for whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. So the Lord was sorry he had ever made them and put them on the earth. It broke his heart. And the Lord said, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, and I will destroy every living thing, all the people, the large animals, the small animals that scurry along the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I am sorry I ever made them. But Noah found favor with the Lord. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God. Noah was the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now God saw the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. God observed all this corruption in the world, for everyone on earth was corrupt. So God said to Noah, I have decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have filled the earth with violence. Yes, I will wipe them all out along with the earth. Build a large boat from cypress wood and waterproof it with tar, inside and out. Then construct decks and stores throughout its interior. Make the boat 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Leave an 18-inch opening below the roof all the way around the boat. Put the door on the side and build 3 decks inside the boat, lower, middle, and upper. Look, I am about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die, but I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring a pair of every kind of animal, a male and a female, into the boat with you to keep them alive during the flood. Pairs of every kind of bird and every kind of animal and every kind of small animal that scurries along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and for all the animals. So Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. Genesis chapter 7 from verse 1 to 23 says, When everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, Go into the boat with all your family, for among all the people of the earth, I can see that you alone are righteous. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice, and take 1 pair of each of the others. Also take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and a female in each pair to ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood. 7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. So Noah did everything as the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. Pay attention to that. He went on board the boat to escape the flood, he and his wife and his sons and their wives. With them were all the various kinds of animals, those approved for eating and for sacrifice, and those that were not, along with all the birds and the small animals that scurry along the ground. They entered the boat in pairs, male and female, just as God had commanded Noah. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. That very day, Noah had gone into the boat with his wife and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. With them in the boat were pairs of every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, along with birds of every kind. 2 by 2 they came into the boat, representing every living thing that breathes. A male and female of each kind entered, just as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door behind them. For 40 days the flood waters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. As the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely on the surface. Finally, the water covered even the highest mountains on the earth, rising more than 22 feet above the highest peaks. All the living things on earth died: birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the people. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land died. God wiped out every living thing on the earth: people, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and the birds of the sky. All were destroyed. The only people who survived were Noah and those with him in the boat, and the flood waters covered the earth for 150 days. Last chapter, Genesis chapter 8, from verse 1 to 18. And it says, "But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and livestock with him in the boat. He sent a wind to blow across the earth, and the flood waters began to recede. The underground waters stopped flowing, and the torrential rains from the sky were stopped. So the flood waters gradually receded from the earth. After 150 days, exactly 5 months from the time the flood began, the boat came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. 2.5 months later, as the waters continued to go down, other mountain peaks became visible. After another 40 days, Noah opened the window he had made in the boat and released a raven. The bird flew back and forth until the floodwaters on the earth had dried up. He also released a dove to see if the water had receded and it could find dry ground. But the dove could find no place to land because the water still covered the ground. So it returned to the boat, and Noah held out his hand and drew the dove back inside. After waiting another 7 days, Noah released the dove again. This time, the dove returned to him in the evening with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. Then Noah knew that the flood waters were almost gone. He waited another 7 days and then released the dove again. This time, it did not come back. Noah was now 601 years old. On the first day of the new year, 10.5 months after the flood began, the flood waters had almost dried up from the earth. Noah lifted back the covering of the boat and saw that the surface of the ground was drying. 2 more months went by, and at last the earth was dry. Then God said to Noah, "Leave the boat, all of you, you and your wife, and your sons and their wives. Release all the animals, the birds, the livestock, and the small animals that scurry along the ground, so they can be fruitful and multiply throughout the earth." So Noah, his wife, and his sons and their wives left the boat. And all of the large and small animals and birds came out of the boat, pair by pair. So that was actually till 19, not 18. So that was Genesis chapter 8 from verse 1 to 19. So from the story of Noah, here are some key takeaways for the world today. Number 1, God decided to wipe out the old human race, along with every other living thing he had created, because of the extent of human wickedness on the earth, except for Noah. This was because Noah was the only blameless person living on earth at the time. He was a righteous man that walked in close fellowship with God. This is a reference to Noah's gene pool. So as we were told in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, the human gene pool had been corrupted by the giant Nephilites, which produced hybrids by having intercourse with women. Noah's bloodline was the only one that was still pure and fully human. That's why he found favor with the Lord. Once God informed Noah of his plans to destroy all living creatures and the earth, he instructed him to build a boat. God gave him specific instructions for how to build this boat, what to fill it with, materials to use to build it, because he was getting ready to flood the whole earth and kill every living thing. That's according to Genesis chapter 6, verse 17. One of the things I find so interesting about Noah's story and love is that God even went as far as instructing him to take enough food on board for himself, his family members, and all the animals. And Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. Then about a week before God made it rain and flooded the earth, he told Noah when to go into the ark with his family, all the animals, food items, etc. And Noah obeyed. It is important to note that Noah was 600 years old by the time he was done building this boat. And the flood began. So it had been about 100 years since he started building and preparing. After Noah, his family, and all the animals got into the ark, God himself closed the door of the ark behind them, sealing them shut, which means nobody else and nothing else could get on board. If you were not on board already, that was it. You were locked out because God sealed them in. Again, hear the overtones of the 5 foolish virgins that were locked out of the marriage feast. Torrential rain, heavy torrential rain, coupled with underground waters, fell for 40 days and 40 nights. After the rain stopped, the flood waters continued to cover the earth for 150 days, which is a total of 5 months. In that time, God had killed every living thing on the earth, including people, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and the birds of the sky. The only people who survived were Noah and those that were with him on the boat. That's according to Genesis 7:23. The flood waters were so high that it covered the highest mountain peaks. By the time God dried up the flood waters, a whole year had gone by, because Genesis 8:13 tells us that Noah was now 601 years old. That means Noah had up to a year's worth of food, water, etc. on the ark for their use, as well as for the animals on board to eat and drink. Saints, that's an impressive amount of prepping, especially considering there was little to no method of preservation available to them on board. The biggest takeaway for me from Noah's story is that God is able and powerful to sustain the righteous even in the midst of calamity. The Great Flood was a cataclysmic world event, and yet God preserved and protected his own. However, this was predicated on Noah's full obedience and preparation as instructed by God, because faith is both spiritual and practical. Now, bringing that back into our subject matter and the context of preparing for the second coming of Jesus, we know from our main text of Matthew chapter 24 that a lot of catastrophic world events are going to happen leading up to his return. Yet, Jesus instructs us to prepare so that we are not caught unawares, or even worse, locked out of the marriage feast like the 5 foolish virgins. What that looks like for each and every single one of us will look very different depending on your personal circumstances and situation. I don't say that to scare you, but to encourage you to prepare. Pray to God and ask Him for specific instructions for your situation and obey them completely. Pay no mind to what obeying God would do to your reputation here on earth, because it is not yours to protect. I bet people in Noah's time thought he was mad when he was preaching about a flood, when it had never even rained before that day, and they probably even mocked him. But when those heavy torrential rains started falling and the underground waters erupted, nobody was laughing or mocking him then. In closing, the second coming of Jesus is one of those events many of us have heard about or have been hearing about for several years now. The reason why is because it is part of the gospel proclamation. Still, it hasn't happened yet. And if we are not careful, it's so easy to become apathetic or cynical, or even lose sight of our eager expectation for the Lord, especially with how busy and mundane life can be, and the fact that we have been waiting for over 2,000 years now. That's a long time, guys. At the same time, if we do not hear a lot of sermons on this topic, or any sermons on this topic, that can cause us to lose sight of its imminence. Yet Jesus in his word, the Bible, assures us that he will definitely return. And given how hard and bad things are currently, and the fact that they are going to get worse, that is good news. The pertinent question to ask ourselves now is, am I ready to meet Jesus when he returns, or if he calls me home beforehand? Not every believer will be alive to meet Christ at his return. Some of us he will call home beforehand, and that's fine. But I thank God that he has given us specific examples and instructions on how to prepare to meet him either way, like we learned from the 3 parables I read earlier, namely the parable of the faithful, sensible servant, the parable of the talents, and the parable of the 10 virgins. With that being said, let's keep preparing daily to meet Jesus, because he could arrive any moment from now. Thank you for joining me today. The Soul Food Podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all other streaming platforms. So share and subscribe as you listen. Follow me on Instagram at the_soul_food_podcast to stay connected. Until next time, may the Lord of Peace, Christ Himself, give you His peace at all times and in every situation. The Lord be with you all and show you His favor. Amen.